So I just wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for joining. My name is Jason from Sassafras, and I do training and implementations. And we're going to talk about hardware asset management in the 7.8 build, and I'll give you a little bit of an idea about what's coming in the 7.9 build later this summer. A couple of new features that are coming in. So if you've been a customer for a while, you may know that our product has evolved a lot in the last few years. It started out as a concurrent use license manager, actually it's been over 30 years now ago, and that was the primary use case for many, many years. So 3 or 4 years ago, a major shift was underway in terms of development for our web interface, and the key configure admin console. It hasn't been left behind by any means. Any new feature we can add there is going there. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about with regards to lifecycle management, inventory management today are things that they're also available in key configure. I'll bring it up as we go. I'll pop open the key configure window and show you. But most of what I'm going to demo tonight, I'm going to kind of stick with the web interface. So starting with the computers table, we've got a new category here called imported. And this is where anything coming in from our integrations with Intune or Jamf are going to go, as well as any kind of CSV import, and possibly our integration with Google that allows you to bring in your Chrome devices, your Chrome OS devices, which we now have a client for as well. So we've got a kind of Chrome extension client for Chrome OS that allows you to track that hardware, gather the same kind of hardware configuration details we do about Windows and Mac computers, as well as monitor logins and track specified URLs for cloud-based products. So that's new. Other things that have changed in the computers table are a little bit more about this imported category. This is where I mentioned Jamf and Intune. I'll show you where those scripts live, but there's a few use cases that you might have for bringing computers or iOS or Android devices in from Intune or Jamf. One is staging the equipment prior to installing our client. We don't have a client for iOS, but you might have computer records in Intune that you haven't received the equipment yet. Our client hasn't been installed, and you want to stage it for lifecycle and inventory management so that you can assign the owner, department, and other lifecycle type fields or asset fields ahead of time. And then when that computer comes in, disk gets imaged, and the client logs in for the first time, it self-identifies based on the serial number or the computer name and just picks up that pre-existing record right out of the imported category, and it will move into dedicated or leased, depending on the rules that you've got set up internally. So that's one use case. Another might be that the client is already installed and the record already exists here in AllSight, but you've got data in the asset fields for department, asset ID, location, this kind of information in Jamf or Intune, and you just want to supplement that, populate those fields here. Similar kind of thing, and that script can be used to either add data to pre-existing records or create new records that don't already exist here, or both. And there's two separate scripts, one for devices. What we call devices in this context means iOS or Android type devices. Let me find those scripts really quickly. Import from Intune computers, import computers from Jamf, and then you see there's import devices from Intune and devices from Jamf. This just means iOS and Android mobile devices, and the computers are any kind of other standard computer that might have a standard operating system, Windows, OS X, Mac OS. And the important thing here is that even though we're using this word devices for mobile devices, they're not going to come to this devices table. They will show up in the imported category under computers. That's because the fields for, say, an iPhone are going to be more relevant for computers where you've got CPU type, model name, um, memory, free space on the disk. This sort of information is much more in line with a computer. And so those mobile devices come in when you use those scripts here. Other than just inventory management, another use case you might have for bringing in iPads or other kinds of equipment is loaner checkout. So that's something else I'll show you here during the call tonight. If you haven't seen that yet, we've got a new loaner checkout tool. It kind of uses some of the other things that we'll talk about. So I'll save it till the end or toward the end anyway. But that's another use case you might have for bringing maybe even computers that don't have our client installed in. Another thing to note, this imported category, they can live there as long as they don't have the client installed. And imported computers, like dormant and excluded, do not pull from your available key server or all site license seats that you have available. So there's no licensing implications for using any of the features that we're talking about unless you start deploying the client and those clients start logging in and grab a leased or dedicated seat. And that's true for things that come into the computers table, as well as things that come into the devices table, like printers, monitors, storage drives, or things like that. So on this computers page, which used to be called printers, you see there's a number of categories here. And then in this type column, there are subcategories for each of the primary device types. So this is a camera device, which was probably created manually. But you'll see that within here, there's this device type field with a built-in drop-down list of options that you can add to. So you can customize this subtype list with as many additional subtypes as you might need. And those are independent by primary type. So for cameras, you saw that what we have, there's some built-in ones for printers, displays, storage drive, and you can have a custom list for each of those independent primary categories. As far as getting the devices in, if you come to this page or in Key Configure under the window menu, get the devices page window, you'll probably see a lot of monitors and storage drives here already, as long as you're running 7.8 and the client has been updated to 7.8 as well, because computer, any monitor or storage drive connected to a computer with our client installed, as long as that client can identify the device with a unique serial number, we're creating, as of 7.8, a new record within the system in this devices page for that equipment. And if you go into one, if it was automatically created like a hard drive, what you'll see is that the computer it was last connected to or last seen connected to is listed. So there's a link there. You can also drag and drop computers from, I could drag and drop to establish a link between a device and a computer manually. So with devices as well as computers, we're going to have the life cycle stages, these asset fields. And one of the things that I wanted to show you is how you can populate these fields in bulk for many devices or computers at once. You don't have to come in here and manually do this, or import with a CSV file for everything. Back here in settings and scripts, there is a new script, and there's two I want to show you. One is called Set Asset Fields right here. You just check the box to install it. And then the other one is called Move Computers. And there's Move Computers and Move Devices. These do the same thing, just one's for computers and one's for devices. So if I come to the computers page and I make a selection of computers, in bulk, I can modify the asset fields. So if I click to run the script, I can add an apartment, location, region, building, and room number. And then I can set a field lock on this entire group of computers by just adding the data here and clicking OK. Run that script and populate that data. And then similarly, there is one called Move Computers. These fields are all drop downs. So these are selections. But again, I can make bulk changes to any of these fields with that script to a group of computers at once. That set asset fields one is new, but the other one, the move computers, has been around for a little while, although it's been changed and new fields have been added to it fairly recently. So next, let me pull up key configure, because you can imagine that the idea here is you've got your equipment possibly right from the time the PO has been issued all the way through to retiring the equipment. And maybe it's not an Intune or Jamf and you can't use the scripts to pull it in, but you've got a CSV file from Dell, for example, with an asset report that they might send out. So let me I'm going to minimize here. This can only be done in key configure. And I just want to demonstrate, in case you haven't seen it, what our import process looks like for hardware. So it's basically the same for computers, devices, and purchase records, although purchases, especially software purchase records, are a little different. They can be a little bit more complex. I won't talk about importing purchases too much now, but if you do have questions, we might pick that up on a one-on-one call. The process is basically the same, but there's a few more questions that can arise for especially software purchase records, as I said. So I'm just going to drag this CSV file into the computers window, and that's going to open a dialog. I'm going to go ahead and open the CSV file just to give you an idea of what this looks like. I don't have Excel, but this should open in Numbers. So you can see this is just a flat CSV with columns at the top. I'm sorry, a row at the top that is the column labels, one row per device, with the first row being the column headers. Very simple. I dragged and dropped this file into the computers window, and this dialog popped open where I've already got a saved map for the Dell asset report. So once I create the field map, I can use that for every additional subsequent import that uses the same format. In this case, I'm going to just click to edit it to show you what this looks like. So the idea here is you've got the database fields here on the left, and you've got the fields from the spreadsheet here on the right. If something doesn't map over, like the computer records aren't going to have some of this information that has to do with the purchase. But we've got some hardware details here we can map in. You would just look for the field on the left and then drag the relevant field over from the right side over to the left side, underneath the field that you're mapping to. If there's any exact matches where our field name and what's in the document or the CSV file match identically minus spaces, they will automatically map. I'm not sure where this came from. We'll get rid of that. So something like this would map automatically because it will ignore the space. But for the most part, you're going to drag from the right side over to the left side the fields that you're going to map. And once you're finished, it gives you an example and shows you with the check mark which ones have been mapped over. And then when I click OK, it's just saving that. I would give it a name usually. And when I click OK here, that's when that import is going to begin. I'm going to click it just to give you an idea of what happens. When it hits fields like dates that need to be interpreted, it just asks you, here's the field, here's what the information is that's in the spreadsheet, here's what I'm interpreting it as based on this date format, but you can select and correct it for that sort of thing. Anything where our field requires a selection from a drop-down, it will also prompt you, unless it finds an exact match. Let's say you're mapping in a life cycle stage and there's not an exact match, then you can, it will just simply show you for this life cycle stage field, this is the value that I see in the document. Select from the drop down of what that means. So you might have, salvaged or something as your life cycle stage, and that might map to retired or something else in our database. So it's really a pretty smart tool for data imports that are pretty straightforward. And I just noticed your comment there, Joe. And it looks like you probably put that in there back when I was talking about the auto discovery. I'll come back to some of that here in a minute, but yeah, the imports are really pretty straightforward. I'm going to stop this and not bring those devices in here. But Again, just like what I said with the other integrations, you can add data to pre-existing fields as well. So if you wanted to bring in details, as long as you can match up against a serial number or a computer name, you can append or add additional data to pre-existing records from a CSV file as well. And that works for computers, devices, as well as for the purchase records. So a couple of other things. I've mentioned a couple of times the Jamf and Intune. I pointed to where they are. They're really pretty simple. So let me just open up the settings for one. Import computers from Intune, for example. If I go into the settings, you see I just need to tell it where it is, give it some authentication details, and tell it whether it's going to create imported records, update pre-existing records in the system, or do both and just bring everything in. If it doesn't already have a match, create it. So that gets all those computers in or something like Jamf or Intune. And anything that already exists, you can update fields like the warranty date, purchase date, department, or that sort of thing using that script. And then for changes that might occur on a daily or weekly basis, you can actually create a schedule for a sync. So changes will be updated on a periodic basis just to make sure things within the AllSight instance are in line with what's there on the Jamf or Intune side. Hope that all makes sense. And then you'll see import computers from Jamf. The settings are very similar. Instance, username, password, and then again, same options. So all of the data fields are pre-mapped. Everything's kind of in place. There's one additional option here is to set the owner field from the imported data. So again, do you want to populate the owner field based on what's in Jamf or not? Is the only additional option in this script. And then the devices one look very similar in terms of the bringing those in. Although in this case, you're always going to create new records. And if the record's already there, it'll simply find the match and make any changes that are necessary. But for the most part, it's assuming you definitely want to create new records for devices, so there's no drop down. So beyond that, I mentioned the Dell, Lenovo, and Microsoft warranty date scripts. Those are right here. And again, once these are installed, just by checking the box, you're going to run them right from the computers page. Dell is a little different than Lenovo and Microsoft because they require an API key. So if I come here and select gather Dell dates, you'll see it's going to request API key as well as a two-factor kind of authentication key secret that you can get from them. And then there's a few options here, but in terms of where to put some of the data. But basically what you're doing is populating on this purchase page these fields directly from the manufacturer for your computers. And then the only other script I wanted to mention, I talked about those and I showed you the set asset fields and move computers. Oh, there's another one, but I'll come back to it in just a minute after we look at the loaner checkout. I'll show you why it's important for that one. But have a look through this library of scripts in the settings page. In Key Configure, if you go up to the file menu, there's a manage scripts window. If you haven't seen this before, looks a little different, like a lot of things between these two interfaces, but the idea is the library is at the bottom and you can either drag it up to the middle to install it locally on the computer that you're using Key Configure on, or if you drag it up to the top, that will install it at the server level for anyone who happens to log in and has access. And then you'll notice here in the web, you can install any of them from here, but some of them can only be run from within Key Configure. So have a look through the list. There's a lot of cool stuff. All of this is functionality that was requested by a customer at some point. So if you have a need for any kind of bulk changes, chances are, if it's not in the UI by default, it's probably already here. But if you don't find what you're looking for, but it's a similar kind of function, definitely reach out to us, either support@sassafras.com or you can shoot an email to me directly, jason.s@sassafras.com, for any kind of requests for these kinds of bulk changes in the database. So before we look at the loaner checkout and a couple of other things, I wanted to show you here in settings, this columns page. So this is in the web interface, how you can create custom drop downs for fields like department, location, region. And up here at the top, these are going to apply to computers, devices, and purchase records if they're there. There's a few different fields here under purchases that have to be managed here. Or if you've got different departments that you want to include in computers versus devices versus purchase records, you can manage each individual device type or hardware type down here underneath the individual ones. So this is for bulk or would apply to all three, and then you can do them individually down here. And then it's pretty simple. I just open this dialog and I can just, create department 1, enter department 2, and then I can choose whether to require a selection from that dropdown. Now, one thing that's important to note here is that all of the changes being made on this page here, and then I'll show you the relevant page in Key Configure where you would make these changes there. It's really just UI changes. So we're not actually going into the back end where the database is and changing the data type of the column in the database, or creating a drop down and restricting access at the database level. These are UI changes, which means that they will affect manual entries only here in the web UI. I can still import into these fields things that don't comply with the rules that we're essentially making for the UI here. I can still import from a CSV file data, and the client can, in some cases, still overwrite. The difference with the client for these fields is that there is a lock that can be applied. So if I go to the computers page, and I open up a computer record, and we hit the asset fields, I can lock the asset fields, and that's going to lock the UI, so I can't make manual changes without unlocking. And it will also tell the client not to overwrite the data if it happens to find an asset ID. This is fairly common for HP equipment, is they will drop the serial number into a field called asset ID in the BIOS. So our client gets installed and it finds a field that says asset ID and it drops a serial number here. You drop your asset ID in, imported from Jamf or a CSV file, and then you log in the next day and it's been replaced with the serial number. There's nothing we can really do about the fact that HP drops that data into a field called asset ID. But what you can do is when you import, that script allows you to do that lock in bulk. So really quickly, if I come here and I make a selection of computers and I run that set asset field script, I can't change the asset ID here because that is a field that's unique for each device. I'm not going to make a bulk change for the asset ID field, but I can set the lock, and it would apply to all of those asset fields, even if they're not part of this script. So if I apply that lock, it's going to lock the asset fields for these computers, even if I haven't made any changes to any of the asset fields, and just run it just for that script or just for that one setting. So one other thing I think I'm going to go ahead and mention now, what's coming in 7.9, based on a demo we had internally of a beta build. So this is not absolute set in stone, but it seems fairly certain at this point. A big change is, you probably know we've always gathered usage data for software and logins for hardware, but we have not logged changes over time for our computer records for any of these asset fields. I'm sorry, hardware configuration fields, or any of these kinds of asset fields. So you can add whatever data you want and you can make whatever changes you want, but there's no logging of historical information about these fields. It's just whatever's in there today is what's there. 7.9, I believe, is going to have a history tab over here that will allow you to see a timestamp, what the data used to be and what it was changed to at that date and time. So that's a pretty big change. Is a new sort of historical log of changes to both these asset fields as well as any of these configuration details. So if memory gets added or removed, you can see when the hard drive kind of filled up with space, that sort of thing. Now we're already gathering when an install date happened for the current build of the operating system, but you'll be able to see historical changes over time for install of the operating system. Although I think our audit reports for software installs might be able to give you some of that kind of information now. So I mentioned some of these drop downs you can create. You can add labels and do the same kind of customization, including selecting a data type for your 10 custom fields that are available for computers and now devices and purchase columns. That's new for devices and purchases. And then down here is where you can add, I mentioned each of those primary categories on the devices page has their own drop-down list of subtypes. That's where this is managed here in settings, in columns. Down at the bottom, there's the primary and then the subtypes that are built in, and then you can add additional values to those drop-downs for subtypes. One hesitation here, both for life cycle stages and device types, is that you can add, and as soon as I type something into this and save, it will create it, but I can't delete or remove them from here. So I just caution, create it if you really need it, and repurpose it if you no longer need it. But once it's there, it's not super easy to remove these. And that applies to your subtypes under devices as well as the lifecycle stages. This can be done in Key Configure as well. So if I go back to Key Configure, the UI looks quite a bit different, and there's actually two separate windows for the two different functions. But under Config, there's Define Columns. This is where I go to create the drop-downs for the asset fields, or the up to 10 custom fields for computers, devices, and purchase records. Just go New Column, type the label, select the data type. If you want to add a drop-down, you can. If you want to require users select from that drop-down, you can. Otherwise, it's just an open text field. And again, the data type is UI restrictions. So if I select I want to require numbers, manually typing numbers into those fields will be enforced by the user interface, not because the backend database field has been changed. Still a text field in the backend to prevent bugs and other errors that might come with data that's already there, or imports that might bypass the UI. Hope that all makes sense. And then the other one under config is the defined custom values. And this is where you go for those lifecycle stages and device types we mentioned. But again, you'll see there's an add, but there's no remove or delete option. So be careful with adding additional items here. You notice there's an on loan and a loan pool lifecycle stage subtype that's been created here. Those are obviously for the custom extra for loaner checkout. So I'm on this extras page. If you don't see it at all, it's because you haven't installed any yet. And in settings, you'll see right above scripts here is extras. And just like installing a script, you just check this box, it will install it, refresh the page, and you'll see this extras in the main navigation. And contact tracing has been around for a little while. The couple of new ones that I wanted to show you are of course, the loaner checkout, as well as this user assets extra. And so if we go to the extras page, just like the one-click reports, you can add these to your dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and open up the loaner checkout one. And what you'll see is if I remove this scope, we've got a very small loan pool here. I can see what's available or ready to loan. Here's the list. I can come up into the search bar and scan a barcode for the serial number or the asset ID, and it'll filter to it. When I find it, I just select the computer I want to check out. If I'm checking out a device as well, I can do them both at the same time. click checkout. And now I mentioned that there was one more script I wanted to show you. I'll show you in a second, but what it's called is import user details from Active Directory. Previously, in previous versions of AllSight and KeyServer, our user fields, or I'm sorry, our user records were just based on operating system login usernames. The client is sitting on a computer, a user logs into the operating system, we see a username, create a user record out of it. And that was really all it consisted of, and all that it was made up of. Now, if I come into Key Configure, I'm going to go into the users table. I'm just going to double click one here because it's easier and I don't have to navigate away from the loaner checkout tool. You'll see there's a bunch of new fields in a user record for department, domain, phone number, email address, and this external ID field that the script I'm mentioning, you can map another AD field into for, let's say, a barcode for a student ID. So here, where it says check out to, I can scan a barcode to search for a user ID. I can begin typing either the username or the full name of the user. And then when I make a selection, it will populate any of the additional details that have been added to the database, either through that import script or because they've been here before and I manually typed it in here. So if I manually type here and perform a checkout, it will save that data to that record locally. It doesn't push it backwards to Active Directory, but it can pull in from AD or it can save locally from the UI here. And then when I go to check this out, it will create this page that I can print as kind of a receipt. This is a copy of this has also been emailed out to the end user and potentially an administrator if I set that up. And then when I go to check it in, I simply reverse the process, return selected, do this. It's going to be confirmed by me. I'm the user logged in, and click return, and it gets added back out to the loan pool. So pretty straightforward, and making use of a number of other tools. I won't go into the settings and kind of walk you through setup of this, although it is fairly simple. I'll just tell you that if you go to our main website, sassafras.com, in the top right corner, click on the search bar and just search for loaner checkout. There's a blog post that walks you through the entire setup process and talks about all the different options and features within the loaner checkout module here. So these extras are added in settings, and then they will show up on this extras page that you can use or add to your dashboard. One thing I didn't mention on that for loaner checkout is you can have more than one loan pool. Normally you would just have separate divisions. And then when I select a division, any computers that are in a loan pool for that division would be all that I saw here. Another way of doing that is through account access. You can have different user groups with access to different computers and sort of have separate loan pools based on that. But by default, everything is part of a primary loan pool that can be subdivided in a couple of different ways. Hope that makes sense. I'm going to come back to extras and show you this other one, this user assets one, which is also new. This one gives you kind of a user-centric view of assets. So if I, again, look up a specific user, it's going to give me some details here, give me a link out to their user record here in the web. But then what this is showing me is all of the computers where this user was the last person to log in. Additionally, any computers where his name is in the owner field that have been assigned to him, and then anything that's currently on loan to him as well will show up in this list. So I had a customer in a corporate environment that said this is great for kind of an exit interview. Is come here, look them up, and ask. You can ask about this equipment where they were the last user, owner, or on loan. And then similarly for devices. This is going to show me any monitor or storage drive that was last seen connected to one of their computers, or really any other device that has been assigned to one of this user's computers, or if the device, if their name is in the owner field or if it's on loan to them. And then again, similar for software products that have been assigned to this user or their computer in a purchase or policy. I can also run login reports, usage reports, audit reports for installed software against this username, and then I can print this as well. So this is another pretty cool one for that lifecycle or inventory management as it relates to individual users, kind of that user-centric view of assets. There's a couple of others here that are kind of cool. I'll show you one more. This user affinity one allows you to select a computer group. This one's popular for, let's say, faculty and staff type thing in a higher ed environment, where you want to see who the primary user of a group of computer is, who logs in the most and uses each computer the most, because that's likely the person it's assigned to. And then you can just simply, on a one-by-one basis, drop their name into the owner field, or up top here, I could in bulk do that same action and just drop the primary username into the owner field for all those computers at once. So again, extras, kind of like those scripts, except they have their own web UI element, and they run on the web side, as in the web server, as opposed to on the server itself, which is where the scripts are going to run. One more thing I said I'd mention and show you is attaching documents to computers and devices. So if you're familiar at all with our purchase records, whether it's hardware or software purchase records, you might know that there's this documents page. You can go into edit mode and drag either a URL right from the browser, or you can drag, obviously you wouldn't normally drag this page in, but from another browser window, you might drag a URL link to a document of some kind for a PO, or you can actually drag the document itself, any kind of file format, whether it's a JPEG, Word document, PDF, Excel, or something like that. And it will save a copy of that document right with this purchase record. Well, people have been requesting a similar kind of functionality for computers and devices now. You're not usually going to drag in a purchase record necessarily into an individual computer. A lot of times when you're purchasing hardware, you're buying many different things with one PO. And so if you've got 1,000 computers, you wouldn't want to save an individual copy of that PO document into or on every single computer record. So that kind of thing, if you really wanted to purchase order associated with a computer and not to use our purchases module, you would probably want to upload that somewhere and then just drag a link in. And you can add those in bulk to many computers at once to apply a link to a document, so you're not saving many copies of the same file on the database or in the server and taking up all that hard drive space. So that was the other main fairly new 7.8 feature. That one actually came in 7.8.08. So if you're not up to the most recent build, you're not going to see the documents tab here for hardware records. One other thing I wanted to mention about the upcoming release, 7.9, is some key configure functionality that's making its way into the web. So currently on the computers page in the web, you see that we have divisions, and there is this thing called tag-based maps down here. I can also use tags by filtering the page by tags up here, and I can add tags using a script in bulk or one by one. So if I make a selection of computers, I can come up here and add tags from here, and then filter on those tags from here. Or on a one-by-one basis, of course, I can go into a computer record to where categorization is and add tags manually one by one here. But what is missing is filters. So if I open Key Configure's computer windows up, here's my divisions and my login types. Those are login types and divisions. And then we've got filters, and then below filters is where the tags live, which is similar for some tags down here. Filters are going to make their way into the web interface in Key Configure. I'm sorry, in the 7.9 release later this summer. It'll function a little bit differently. Right now, you kind of have to know there's a certain number of options for some fields you can filter on, but otherwise you've got to build out this convoluted filter using weird syntax and hex codes to look for specific data. You usually have to reach out to us to help with any kind of custom filter that strays from this short list of built-in fields you can filter on. In the web interface is going to be a more dynamic filter building tool that will allow you to filter against many additional fields without having to memorize or ask us for a special hex key or syntax to use. So that's another thing that's coming in the next major release, at least based on the demo of the beta that we saw the other day. Until it's released, it's not absolutely confirmed, but I feel fairly sure that will make it in. So appreciate everybody joining and listening in. Let me know if anything else comes up. All right. So thank you very much.